I want to tell you about a number that came out in January 2025 that should have shattered every assumption Washington holds about global power, but somehow got buried beneath headlines about trade wars and military buildups. India's GDP grew 8.2% in 2024. Not 2%, not 5%, 8.2%. The fastest growth rate of any major economy on Earth. But the growth rate isn't what should terrify American strategists lying awake at night. What should terrify them is the scale behind that growth and what it represents. Let me paint you a picture that will change how you see the next decade unfolding. I was in Mumbai 6 months ago, walking through a street market that looked chaotic to the untrained eye. Vendors everywhere, the smell of spices mixing with car exhaust, the sound of haggling in a dozen languages. But I noticed something that made me stop cold. Every single vendor, from the woman selling vegetables to the teenage boy hawking phone accessories, had the same thing, a small QR code printed on paper, taped to their stalls. I watched as customers pulled out smartphones, not expensive iPhones, but $60 devices, scanned those codes, and completed transactions instantly. No cash changed hands, no credit cards, no banks involved as intermediaries. The money transferred in real time, for free, through India's unified payments interface. That vegetable seller, her name was Kamala. 50 years old, never had a bank account until 2018. Now she processes hundreds of digital transactions daily. She has a credit history. She got a microloan based on her payment data. She expanded from 1 card to 3. And here's the part that should make Washington's blood run cold. Multiply this story by 500 million people. India processed 131 billion digital transactions in 2024. Let me put that in perspective for you. America's entire card network, Visa, MasterCard, everything combined, processed maybe 160 billion. China's Alipay and WeChat Pay together hit around 120 billion. India, with a GDP 1/5 the size of America's, is processing nearly as many digital payments as the world's largest economy, and they're growing at 40% year over year. But here's what makes this truly dangerous for American supremacy. India built this system themselves. No American technology, no Silicon Valley involvement. Indian engineers, Indian architecture, Indian standards, and it works better than most Western systems. Zero fees, instant settlement, universal access. 3 years ago, I was giving a lecture at Harvard when a student asked me something that's haunted me ever since. Professor Varoufakis, she said, what happens when a democracy rises to superpower status but doesn't align with American interests? I gave her some generic answer about democratic values and shared interests. I was wrong. India is that democracy, and they're proving that democratic values don't automatically mean American alignment. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the West demanded everyone condemn Russia and join sanctions. India refused. They abstained in UN votes, ignored sanction pressure, and actually increased their oil purchases from Russia. In 2024, India became one of Russia's largest oil customers, buying discounted crude, refining it, and exporting refined products, making money while helping Russia evade Western sanctions. Washington's response: polite diplomatic murmurs. Why? Because America can't afford to alienate India. They need India to balance China. But India doesn't need America, the way Washington assumes. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with a former colleague at the IMF last spring. She was analyzing India's economic trajectory, and her numbers made her question everything she thought she knew about global power dynamics. Yanis, she whispered over coffee in Georgetown, India's working-age population grew by 11 million people in 2024 alone. That's like adding Belgium's entire population to the workforce in a single year. Think about what that means. While China faces demographic collapse and America struggles with aging populations, India is adding millions of young workers annually. By 2050, India will have 1.67 billion people, while China's population may fall to 1.3 billion. Demographics is destiny in economics, and India's demographics are spectacular, while everyone else's are challenging. But it's not just population. It's what they're doing with that population. India produces 1.5 million engineers every year. They're building 50 kilometers of highway daily. Their manufacturing output grew 9.2% in 24. Apple now produces iPhones in India for global export. Samsung, Foxconn, Pegatron, they're all manufacturing there. But more importantly, Indian companies are moving up the value chain. Tata Group acquired Jaguar Land Rover and made it profitable. Indian firms are making aerospace components for Boeing and Airbus. This isn't the old model where developing countries assemble products designed elsewhere. India is designing and manufacturing, competing globally, setting standards that other countries adopt. Singapore implemented India's payment system, so did the UAE. France is rolling it out. Sri Lanka, Nepal, Mauritius, all adopting Indian digital infrastructure. The most revealing moment came in November 2023 when something happened that perfectly captures this shift. India's space agency successfully landed a probe on the moon's south pole for $75 million. The same week, Russia's Luna 25 mission, inheriting decades of Soviet space technology, crashed and burned. Russian space technology, built by a former superpower, failed. Indian technology, built from scratch by a developing nation, succeeded at 1/10 the cost of equivalent American missions. 6 months later, I was in New Delhi for a conference when a Canadian diplomat pulled me aside. He was visibly shaken. India just expelled our diplomats, he said. We accused them of assassination on Canadian soil, and they responded by kicking us out. Where's American support? The answer was uncomfortable. America made quiet diplomatic noises and moved on. They couldn't afford to alienate India over Canada's problems. That's not the behavior of a superpower in control. That's accommodation to a rising power too important to antagonize. Here's what happened last year that reveals India's true trajectory. In March 2024, I was reviewing economic data when I noticed something that made me call 3 different sources to confirm. India's economy, measured in purchasing power parity, had reached $14 trillion. That makes it the 3rd largest economy on Earth, behind only China and the United States. But while China's growth is slowing and built on unsustainable debt, India's growth is accelerating and built on genuine productivity gains. While China faces demographic collapse, India has the world's largest and youngest workforce. While China's political system creates international tension, India's democracy makes it impossible to contain or isolate. This creates an impossible puzzle for American foreign policy. The entire post-Cold War strategy assumed democratic nations align with America, while authoritarian nations get contained. India breaks this binary. They're democratic, but non-aligned. They cooperate when it serves them and resist when it doesn't. And they're becoming powerful enough to make this independence stick. Let me show you what this looks like 5 years from now, if current trajectories continue. India's economy hits $6 trillion in market terms, $18 trillion in purchasing power. They're firmly the 3rd largest economy, rapidly closing the gap on China. Their tech sector rivals America's in digital infrastructure and payments. Their manufacturing produces everything from semiconductors to spacecraft. Geopolitically, India leads a coalition of developing nations that align with neither America nor China. They dominate the Indian Ocean. They have strategic partnerships across Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. They set global standards in digital governance and payment systems that much of the developing world adopts. And critically, they pursue policies independent of American preferences. They buy energy from whoever offers the best price. They maintain defense relationships with Russia while cooperating with America on select issues. They trade with China while competing with China. They're pragmatic, not ideological. America faces something it has no strategy for, a superpower that can't be contained because it's democratic, can't be isolated because it's too large, and can't be ignored because it's too important. Washington's entire playbook assumes rising powers must choose sides. India chooses India. This is Washington's nightmare scenario. Not a hostile superpower that can be opposed, but an independent superpower that must be accommodated. A rising power that doesn't need permission and won't follow American leadership. The conversation I had with that IMF colleague ended with her asking a question that haunts me. What happens to American primacy when there are 3 superpowers instead of 2, and the 3rd one refuses to pick a side? The question isn't whether India becomes a superpower. The trajectory makes that inevitable. The question is whether American foreign policy can adapt to genuine multipolarity, to a world where New Delhi makes decisions based on Indian interests regardless of American preferences. Right now, watching Washington's response to India's rise, the answer seems to be no. They're too focused on containing China to notice India's emergence, too committed to maintaining primacy to accept true multipolarity, too wedded to Cold War thinking about alignment and blocks to engage pragmatically with a power that defies both categories. A new superpower is rising faster than anyone predicted, and Washington didn't expect it because they were looking in the wrong direction. While America obsessed over containing one rival, another emerged that can't be contained, can't be ignored, and won't be controlled. India is coming, and the world order that emerges will be shaped as much by decisions made in New Delhi as by those made in Washington or Beijing. That's the reality Washington needs to face. But watching American policy, I fear they won't until it's far too late to adapt. The multipolar world isn't coming, it's here, and India just announced they're setting their own rules.